This is the story of Sarah Jenkins, a young woman whose disappearance in 2008 shook California. But as we'll soon discover, the truth behind her disappearance was far more chilling than anyone expected. In 2008, Sarah Jenkins vanished without a trace, and for over a decade, no one had any answers. Until a breakthrough in 2019 uncovered something no one could have predicted. Sarah Jenkins, a 23-year-old woman, living her life, her future ahead of her. A normal life, right? But then, Sarah vanished. Just like that. The peace of that neighborhood shattered. The calm was replaced by confusion, by fear. And for over 10 years, no one had any answers. No one knew where Sarah was, or who had taken her. As you'll soon hear, the answer lay right next door, in the place they least expected. No one suspected the quiet neighbor, the churchgoer, the man who seemed like one of their own. Before I begin, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. I'd love to know just how far this story is reaching. It was a cool autumn night, the kind where the air feels crisp and the streets are quiet, almost as if time itself has slowed down. Sarah Jenkins was getting ready to head out for the night. A night out with friends. A night full of laughter, joy, and the usual excitement young people feel before a fun evening ahead. But little did anyone know, this would be the last time Sarah's family would see her alive. The night was still. Too still. The darkness crept in, and everything changed in a matter of minutes. The case was cold for years. No leads. No witnesses. Just a heartbroken family and a city left wondering what happened. But in 2019, the case was reopened. And cutting-edge DNA technology would bring new hope to the investigation. The breakthrough. It led investigators to the one person no one ever suspected. A neighbor. A trusted man. Someone who had been hiding in plain sight all along. This discovery would shake the very foundation of a tight-knit community. Before we dive deeper into the shocking case, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of my amazing subscribers. Your support means the world to me, and it's because of you that this channel continues to grow and bring these intense, real-life stories to light. These stories take time, effort, and a lot of heart to produce, but knowing that you're here watching makes it all worth it. If this story is already sending chills down your spine, then don't just sit there. Like this video to show your support, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss a single twist, and share this video with someone who still believes that neighbors can't hide dark secrets. Trust me, they'll thank you for it. And hey, make sure to turn on that notification bell so you're the first to know whenever I drop another gripping story. You don't want to miss out on what's coming next, especially when the truth is far stranger than fiction. Sarah Jenkins and her life before the disappearance. Sarah Jenkins was just 23 years old. Full of promise. The world at her feet. She had that kind of energy about her, the kind that lit up a room the moment she walked in. Her laughter was contagious. Her smile always genuine. People who knew her often said she had a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. Sarah was the type of person who put others first. Whether it was helping a friend in need, volunteering at the local shelter, or just listening when someone needed to talk, she was always there. She had big dreams, dreams of traveling, seeing the world, and pursuing a career that would allow her to make a difference. She wasn't just living for herself. She wanted to help others along the way. She worked 2 jobs, trying to balance her life and save up for a future she'd always imagined. A future full of possibilities. The kind of future you look forward to when you're in your 20s, where everything feels like it could be yours. She had plans. So many plans. But those plans, those dreams, they were taken away in an instant. The night she went missing, Sarah had been out with friends, celebrating, laughing, living in the moment. It wasn't supposed to end the way it did. It wasn't supposed to be her last night. And in the days that followed, the world she knew, the world that was full of hope and excitement, shattered. For Mark and Ellen Jenkins, the phone call came at 2 a.m. on a quiet Sunday morning. A phone call that would change their lives forever. They had no idea what was about to unfold. They had no idea that this would be the moment their daughter's life would slip away from them, and they would be left clinging to a thread of hope, trying to make sense of a nightmare they never saw coming. "Sarah's missing," the voice on the other end of the line told them. "We need you to come to the station. Now." Every parent's worst nightmare, right there in a single sentence. Their daughter, their 23-year-old baby girl, was gone. The disbelief. The panic. The confusion. What do you do when your child is missing? Where do you even start looking? Mark and Ellen rushed to the station, their minds racing with questions. But there were no answers. Only fear. And a growing sense of dread. "Sarah's never run away," Ellen would later say, her voice cracking with anguish. "She would never leave us like this. Something's wrong." In the early days, the search was frantic. Every possible lead was followed. Every possible door was knocked on. Friends, family, even strangers. Everyone was involved in trying to find Sarah. But the police didn't have much to go on. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And still nothing. The investigation seemed to stall, like a car running out of gas on the side of the road. There were no new leads, no new evidence. Just a pile of unanswered questions. Sarah's parents were beside themselves. They had no idea where she could be. No idea who could have taken her. And even more terrifying, why? Why would someone take their daughter? Why would someone take someone so full of life, so full of promise? The small community in California, the one Sarah had grown up in, began to feel the weight of the disappearance. Neighbors whispered in the streets. Parents kept their kids inside a little more. People began locking their doors a little tighter at night. The quiet, peaceful town was no longer the same. Fear had crept in. What happened to Sarah Jenkins? Where was she? "We don't know where she is, but we're not giving up," Mark told the police during one of the early meetings. His voice was steady, but the pain in his eyes was undeniable. But the longer the search went on, the more impossible it seemed. What started as a missing persons case began to feel like a cold, unsolvable mystery. And that uncertainty weighed heavily on Sarah's parents. And then, just when it seemed like the case had gone cold, there was a shift. A breakthrough. But it wasn't a person. It wasn't a sighting. It was something far more chilling. A night out with friends turned into a nightmare. But where did Sarah go? Why hadn't anyone heard from her again? Sarah had gone out to a local bar with some friends that night. The same night she vanished. She had texted her family earlier, letting them know she'd be home soon. But then nothing. Her friends remember her laughing, dancing, and being her usual bubbly self. But something wasn't right. By the time they realized Sarah was missing, it was too late. Her phone was off. There were no signs of her anywhere in the bar. And her car was left parked in the lot, as if she'd just vanished into thin air. The only thing left behind? A small pile of personal belongings. Her purse. A phone. But no Sarah. The missing piece, the one everyone would overlook at first, was a seemingly small detail. The security footage from the bar. Blurry footage that showed a figure, a man walking out of the bar's back entrance, heading in the direction of the parking lot. But who was he? Why didn't anyone see him before Sarah disappeared? Was this the key? Was this the person responsible? Or was this just another piece of the puzzle that made no sense? As days turned into weeks, the community grew restless. And for Sarah's parents, the reality began to set in. Time was slipping away, and they had no answers. Nothing to hold on to. So what do you think? How would you feel if your own trusted neighbor turned out to be the one responsible for the disappearance of someone you love? Do you think there were any signs that the Jenkins family could have picked up on before it was too late? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read and reply to every single comment. It wasn't until 2019 that the case took a sharp turn. Up until then, The investigation had been at a standstill. The file on Sarah Jenkins was growing thick with leads that led nowhere, a trail that grew colder with every passing month. But then something happened. Something that had the potential to change everything. Advances in DNA technology, specifically genealogy testing, opened a door that had been shut tight for years. Investigators, desperate for answers, turned to a new method of DNA analysis that was starting to make waves in cold cases all across the country. Genealogical DNA testing, a method that was already cracking open other unsolved mysteries, was now brought into Sarah's case. This was not just any DNA test. It was a revolutionary process that looked at genetic links through online genealogy databases, matching DNA samples with potential relatives across the country. And this was the breakthrough that investigators had been waiting for. Sarah's case, once thought to be a lost cause, was suddenly alive again. The cold case file was reopened, and the DNA evidence, which had been sitting there in a lab for years, was now put to work in ways no one could have imagined back in 2008. At first, the results seemed almost too good to be true. Could it really be? Could this new technology finally crack the case wide open? As the investigators analyzed the genetic data, they found something chilling. The prime suspect wasn't some faceless stranger lurking in the shadows of a dark alley, ready to strike. No, the breakthrough revealed a far more shocking twist. The person behind Sarah Jenkins' disappearance had been living right next door to her family the entire time. James Parker. He was the quiet neighbor. The man everyone thought they knew. He lived just a few houses down from the Jenkins family. A regular guy. A man who kept to himself, always polite, never causing any trouble. He worked as an air conditioning repairman, a job that took him into people's homes, giving him access to their most intimate spaces. He was someone you could trust. Someone you would never expect to be the one who could do something like this. But as the DNA results poured in, the pieces began to fit together. The evidence pointed straight to Parker. A piece of evidence that had been overlooked at first, but now came into focus. The DNA left behind on the cigarette butts, the beer cans, and even the door handle of Sarah's car. It was all connected to James Parker. The genetic links were undeniable. The man who had lived among the community for years, the one everyone trusted, was now at the center of a police investigation that no one had seen coming. The investigators couldn't believe it. But there it was, clear as day. James Parker's DNA was at the scene of Sarah's disappearance. And with it, the horrifying truth began to emerge. The community was in shock. People who had known James Parker for years, who had waved at him in the street, who had trusted him with their cars, their homes, and even their children, were now left reeling from the truth. This was the kind of revelation that made your skin crawl. The kind of truth that made you question everything you thought you knew about the people around you. James Parker, the friendly neighbor who would fix your air conditioning on a hot summer day, the man who would help you carry groceries to your car, was now the suspect in the disappearance of Sarah Jenkins. The police were quick to move, but the community was slower to react. People were hesitant to believe it. How could this be? How could someone who seemed so normal, so trustworthy, be capable of something so horrific? As the news spread, the once peaceful neighborhood was thrown into turmoil. People began to look at their neighbors differently. The man who lived down the street and had always smiled at you. Could he be hiding something dark? Could the quiet ones really be capable of such evil? The revelation sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community. No one was prepared for the truth. No one was prepared for the idea that their neighbor, their friend, their trusted community member, could be the one responsible for Sarah's disappearance. It was a chilling thought, one that left people questioning not just James Parker, but the very nature of trust itself. The revelation was a gut punch. The kind of truth that no one saw coming, but once it was out there, it felt impossible to ignore. Now that the investigation has shifted, what's your take on this breakthrough in 2019? DNA technology completely changing the course of the case. Do you think it was worth the wait? How do you feel about the idea of DNA bringing justice after all these years? I want to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. James Parker was the kind of guy everyone thought they knew. He was the quiet neighbor, the one you'd pass on your morning walks, nodding politely as you both went on about your day. He was the kind of man who blended into the background, never drawing attention to himself, yet always present in the neighborhood. The kind of man who you'd trust with your lawnmower, or your spare key to water your plants when you were away. A man who attended church every Sunday, dressed neatly, and helped the elderly with their groceries. To everyone around him, James Parker seemed like the perfect neighbor. He was well-liked, respected, and had a reputation as a reliable, hard-working man. People knew his face. They knew his name. They saw him as someone with a solid, steady life. But behind that friendly facade, behind the smiles and small talk, there was something darker lurking. Something no one could have imagined, not even Sarah's parents, who lived just a few doors down from him. James Parker was hiding a secret, a deep and terrifying secret. A secret that he managed to keep buried for years, right under the noses of everyone who trusted him. And now the truth was slowly starting to surface. What was it that made him tick? What turned this quiet, unassuming man into someone capable of taking Sarah Jenkins from her family and burying her in the shadows of a suburban nightmare? As investigators began digging deeper into James Parker's past, subtle clues began to surface. No one thought much of them at first, but as the case unfolded, it became clear. The signs had always been there. Neighbors began to remember small, odd details that, in hindsight, seemed to point to something more sinister. One neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, recalled how she'd seen James standing at the edge of his yard on many occasions, watching Sarah as she got into her car. It wasn't the typical friendly hello. It was different, almost too intense. The way he'd watch her, eyes fixated as she drove away. The way he'd never look away until she was out of sight. It always struck me as strange, she would later say, shaking her head in disbelief. He'd stand there not just waving but staring, like he was waiting for something. Another neighbor, Frank, remembered seeing James lingering near Sarah's car late at night. Too late, in fact, when the rest of the neighborhood was quiet, and everyone was either asleep or inside their homes. It wasn't like him to be outside at those hours. Frank wasn't sure what he was doing there, but something about it seemed off. And yet nobody said anything. Nobody thought it was unusual. It wasn't until later, when everything came to light, that people realized how many strange moments they had overlooked. But that was the thing about James Parker. He was so good at hiding in plain sight, blending in, that no one could have ever suspected him. He was always careful, always calculating, always just a little bit out of sight but never too far away. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, there was one thing that was impossible to ignore. The growing sense of betrayal that weighed heavily on Sarah's parents, Mark and Ellen Jenkins. Mark had known James for years. They'd shared neighborhood barbecues, and James had even helped with repairs around their house. Ellen had trusted him. She had trusted him enough to wave hello when they passed each other on the street, to leave her daughter's safety in his quiet, reliable hands. How could the person they trusted the most now be responsible for their daughter's disappearance? How could this man, the same one who had offered help in the past, been the one to take their daughter and destroy their world? The realization hit them slowly, like a heavy stone sinking into their hearts. They had been so close to the truth, so close to the person who had caused them unimaginable pain, but it was something they never saw coming. It was one thing to lose a child to the unknown, but it was another to know that the person who took her had been standing just yards away, living among them, blending into their lives with every smile and every polite gesture. For Mark and Ellen, the sting of betrayal was unbearable. They couldn't escape the thought of it. How could they have been so blind? How could they have trusted the man who lived right next door? The confusion was overwhelming. One moment, they were exchanging pleasantries over the fence. The next, they were face to face with a dark secret they could never have imagined. Here's something that might shock you. How did James Parker, who seemed like such a good neighbor, manage to hide his dark secret for all these years? Do you think his behavior was an early warning sign? Drop your opinion in the comments. I'm reading and responding to all of them. And while you're at it, tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? It wasn't until 2020 that the chilling confession came, a moment so unexpected, so horrifying, that it shattered everything Sarah's parents had feared and hoped for over the past decade. The years of silence, the years of unanswered questions, all came crashing down when James Parker, the man who had lived among them, the man they had trusted, finally spoke up. It was the kind of confession that turned their world upside down, that changed everything they thought they knew about their daughter's disappearance. James Parker confessed. He admitted to abducting Sarah Jenkins, to taking her from her family and hiding her away for over a decade. The man they had trusted, the man who lived next door, had been the one to take her life. I did it, James Parker said, his voice trembling as the investigators pushed him for details. I took her. I was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. The confession wasn't just a confession. It was a painful revelation that sent shockwaves through the community. The walls of trust and familiarity that had built up over the years now crumbled into dust. James Parker, the quiet neighbor, the churchgoer, the reliable man who had been there for so many, was now a monster in the eyes of everyone who had ever known him. The weight of the confession crushed Sarah's parents. For over a decade, they had fought with uncertainty. They had fought with fear. But now they had the truth. And with that truth came a pain they could never have anticipated. The relief of finding out the truth came at a price. There was no joy in knowing what happened to their daughter. No peace in learning the identity of the man who took her from them. Mark Jenkins sat in silence, his eyes vacant, as he listened to James Parker's words. For so long, he had held on to the hope that someone, anyone, would come forward with the truth. That someone would tell him what had happened to Sarah. But hearing it from the man who had been living right next door, hearing it from someone they had trusted, was a pain too deep to put into words. Ellen Jenkins, his wife, collapsed into tears. The weight of the confession was too much to bear. She had spent years wondering where Sarah was, wondering if she was alive, if she was out there somewhere, just waiting to come home. But now that hope was gone. Their daughter wasn't coming home. Not in the way they had dreamed for years. The person who had taken her life wasn't a stranger. He wasn't some faceless figure who had snatched Sarah from the streets. No, the monster who had done this to her had been living right next door, hiding in plain sight. The confession was a cruel twist of fate. It gave them the answer they had been searching for, but it also tore open wounds that had never fully healed. For the Jenkins family, the truth was no comfort. It was the final blow, a bitter pill they would have to swallow for the rest of their lives. But as the confession came to light, a new question arose. Why? Why did James Parker do it? What was it that drove this seemingly ordinary man to commit such a heinous crime? Was it rage? Obsession? Was it something deeper? Something darker than anyone had realized? As the investigation unfolded, details began to emerge about Parker's mindset, his motives, and the twisted way he had viewed Sarah. It became clear that this wasn't a random act of violence. This wasn't just some spur-of-the-moment decision. No, this had been calculated, planned. Investigators learned that Parker had been watching Sarah for months before that fateful night. He had been stalking her, learning her patterns, studying her routine, all while pretending to be the friendly neighbor. He knew exactly when she would be out, when she would be alone, when she would be most vulnerable. She was there, so close, Parker later admitted in his confession. I couldn't stop myself. I had to do it. I had to make her mine. The chilling nature of his confession sent shivers down everyone's spine. It wasn't just that Parker had taken Sarah. It was the cold, calculated way he had gone about it. The way he had hidden in plain sight, watching Sarah, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But what was it that pushed him over the edge? What made him think he had the right to take another person's life? To destroy an entire family? Some say it was an unhealthy obsession, a twisted fixation that had been festering for years. Others say it was something deeper, something broken inside of him that had finally snapped. Whatever the reason, the truth was undeniable. The man who had seemed so ordinary, so harmless, was capable of the most horrific crime. And now, the Jenkins family had to grapple with the reality of that truth. What could drive a seemingly normal man to commit such a horrific act? James Parker wasn't some monster lurking in the shadows. He wasn't a violent criminal known to the community, nor did he have a history of violent tendencies. He was just there. A man who blended in with the fabric of suburban life. But there was something hiding beneath that calm, friendly exterior. Something dark and twisted that was waiting to be unleashed. So what happened? What made Parker snap? To understand the motivation behind such a heinous act, we need to look deeper into James Parker's past. Behind the quiet man who helped neighbors with their air conditioning and waved hello on the street, there was a history that no one had known about. A history that perhaps held the key to understanding what drove him to commit this crime. James Parker's early years were unremarkable. He grew up in a small town, much like the one he'd later live in. His family was middle class, his father a factory worker, his mother a stay-at-home mom. He was described by those who knew him as an average student, someone who kept to himself but never drew attention for any reason. He wasn't particularly social, but he wasn't a loner either. He went to church on Sundays, helped his neighbors, and lived a seemingly normal life. But normalcy can sometimes be a mask. And behind that mask, something was brewing inside James Parker. Could it have been a need for control? A desperate desire to dominate something in his life when everything else felt out of his reach? Or was it something deeper, a deep-seated obsession that had been festering for years, unnoticed by those around him? In the weeks before Sarah's disappearance, James had begun to show signs of an unhealthy fixation. People who had known him casually began to mention how he would act strangely around Sarah. He seemed to watch her more closely than was normal. He lingered in places where he shouldn't have been, taking an almost unsettling interest in her routine. His behavior wasn't violent at first. No, it was subtler than that. It was the way he watched her from across the street, the way he seemed to be in places he shouldn't have been, just close enough to see her, but far enough to stay unnoticed. He never spoke to her directly, but he watched. And that, in itself, could have been enough to set something off within him. A quiet obsession that, over time, became an overwhelming need. And then, that night, that fateful night in 2008, something changed. Sarah, out with friends, was just a little too far from home. A little too vulnerable. And James, driven by whatever twisted thoughts had been simmering inside him, decided to make his move. The moment was his. He took it. The quiet neighbor, the trusted friend, the man everyone thought they knew, was now a predator. Was it a crime of opportunity? Or was it something more? Was James Parker's life a facade, hiding something far darker that had only been waiting for the right moment to emerge? For Mark and Ellen Jenkins, the truth came crashing down with a force they could never have prepared for. The man who had been a neighbor, a seemingly harmless part of their community, had taken their daughter. Their flesh and blood. The betrayal ran deeper than anything they could have ever imagined. For years, they had searched for answers. For years, they had hoped against hope that their daughter was out there somewhere. That she had run away. That she had been taken by someone they didn't know, someone who didn't live in their neighborhood, someone who wasn't a part of their lives. But now, after more than a decade of wondering, of searching, of living with that unbearable uncertainty, the truth was too much to bear. How could they process it? How could they accept that their own neighbor, the man who had smiled at them, waved at them, helped them when they needed it, had taken their daughter from them? Mark, who had worked so hard to keep his family safe, felt a deep, soul-crushing sense of failure. "I should have known," he would say later, his voice breaking. "How could I not have seen it?" And Ellen, her heart shattered by the reality that the man who had stood by her side in the community, the one who had helped her with small tasks, had been the one to bring their family to its knees. The hurt was too deep. She could never fully understand how someone she had trusted could be capable of something so monstrous. The emotional toll was staggering. Even knowing the truth, they would never be able to erase the pain of that betrayal. The knowledge that Sarah was gone, taken by a man who had been living next door to them, would haunt them forever. I keep asking myself, how could we have not seen it? Ellen's voice trembled when she said it. The guilt, the heartache. It was too much for any parent to bear. And the community, once a safe haven, now felt like a place of false comfort. It was no longer the warm, welcoming neighborhood where children played outside and people helped one another. It had become a place of shadows, where the monster had hidden in plain sight. The Jenkins family would never fully heal. The scars from the betrayal would never fade. They could never undo the pain of what happened. No amount of justice, no matter how final, could ever bring Sarah back. When the news broke of James Parker's arrest, the community was left reeling, stunned into disbelief. It wasn't just the shock of finding out the man who had been living quietly among them for years was responsible for such a heinous crime. It was the realization that they had all been deceived, that someone they had trusted, someone who had been part of their daily lives, had been hiding a terrible secret. Neighbors who once waved hello, who had exchanged pleasantries over the fence or shared a cup of coffee, now viewed Parker with nothing but distrust. The man they thought they knew, the man who had fixed their air conditioning, helped with home repairs, and volunteered at the local church, was now the monster that haunted their town's past. The sense of betrayal was palpable. How many years had Parker lived among them? How many years had he sat in their living rooms, spoken to their children, all while hiding the truth about what he had done? For years, the community had felt safe, secure in the knowledge that the people around them were trustworthy. But now that trust had been shattered, and the entire neighborhood had to come to terms with the fact that someone they had known so well was capable of unspeakable evil. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, trying to process the truth. They couldn't believe that Parker, of all people, could be capable of such a crime. "I never saw it coming," one neighbor whispered, her voice shaky with disbelief. "He was always so quiet, so kind. How did we miss it?" The unsettling realization lingered in the air, a heavy presence that would never fully dissipate. The truth, now exposed, had left the community in a state of permanent unease. The monster had been living among them, and now there was no going back. For Mark and Ellen Jenkins, the arrest of James Parker was a moment they had been waiting for, but it came at a price that they could never fully accept. Finally, after more than a decade of pain and uncertainty, they had justice. They had the truth. They had spent years searching for answers, wondering if Sarah was still alive, wondering if she had been taken by a stranger, someone who had no connection to their lives. But the truth was worse than they had imagined. It wasn't a faceless predator who had stolen their daughter. It was the man who had lived next door, the man they had trusted. The moment Parker was arrested, Mark and Ellen felt a strange mix of emotions. There was relief, of course. The truth was finally out. They could stop searching for answers. The nightmare that had gripped them for so long was over. But at the same time, it was bittersweet. The years of waiting had drained them, emotionally and physically. Their daughter was gone, and no verdict could ever replace the hole she left in their hearts. For Ellen, the reality of the situation was crushing. "It's too late," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter that they found him. It doesn't bring Sarah back. It doesn't fix the years we lost. It doesn't change the fact that we'll never get to hold her again." Mark, too, struggled with the weight of the moment. He had longed for justice, longed for the truth, but now that it had arrived, he couldn't escape the emptiness that filled him. "We waited for so long," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But now that we know, it doesn't make it better. It just makes it final." The closure they had longed for wasn't as sweet as they had imagined. No amount of justice could undo the pain they had suffered. No conviction could bring Sarah back. But at least they knew. At least they had an answer, even if that answer was more painful than they had ever imagined. The trial of James Parker was a long-awaited event, but it was one that felt like it could never bring true closure. After years of waiting, after years of anguish, Sarah's parents finally saw the justice they had been hoping for, but it was no comfort to them. The emotional toll of the years of uncertainty could never be undone. James Parker was found guilty of Sarah Jenkins' kidnapping and murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. For many, it was the resolution they had been waiting for, the conclusion to a case that had haunted the community for over a decade. But for the Jenkins family, no sentence would ever bring Sarah back. No conviction could fill the emptiness they felt, the void that her absence had created in their lives. They had justice, but justice wasn't enough. It would never be enough. As the courtroom erupted in the aftermath of the verdict, Mark and Ellen Jenkins stood together, holding each other up as they faced the reality of their daughter's fate. They were relieved that Parker would never walk free again, but that relief was tempered by the knowledge that no amount of punishment could ever undo the loss of their daughter. Their journey was over, but the scars would never fade. James Parker's life was over, his secret exposed for all to see, but for the Jenkins family, the pain would continue. The trial was over, but the healing would never come. Not in the way they had hoped. As we reach the end of Sarah Jenkins' story, we're reminded of something incredibly unsettling. Something we often forget in our day-to-day lives. This case serves as a harsh reminder that evil doesn't always look like what we imagine. It doesn't always hide in dark corners or behind strange, unfamiliar faces. No, sometimes, evil wears the face of the man who fixes your air conditioner, who waves at you from across the street, who helps you carry your groceries. James Parker, the man who lived right next door to Sarah's family, was the last person anyone would have suspected. He was the friendly neighbor, the churchgoer, the seemingly kind man who was always willing to lend a hand. But beneath that calm, familiar exterior, something far darker was festering. Something that would eventually change the lives of the Jenkins family forever. It's a chilling truth to swallow. Evil can hide behind even the most familiar faces, even the people we trust the most. It's easy to think that the world is full of obvious threats, that the danger is always out there in the unknown. But sometimes the danger is much closer than we realize. It's in the people we know, the people we let into our lives every day. And that's a lesson we cannot afford to ignore. This case teaches us that we must remain vigilant, even when everything around us seems safe, even when the people around us seem harmless. Trusting someone is essential to building a community, to living peacefully, but trust must be earned, not assumed. Sarah's story, while painful and tragic, serves as a warning. We can't afford to let our guard down, to assume that the people next door, the ones who seem so ordinary, are incapable of the unimaginable. We must ask ourselves, how well do we really know the people around us? And if something doesn't feel right, if something feels off, we have to trust that instinct. Because in Sarah's case, the unthinkable happened right under the Jenkins' noses. And that's a tragedy no family should ever have to experience. Now that you know the truth behind Sarah Jenkins' disappearance, we want to hear from you. Imagine this situation. What would you do if you found out that a trusted neighbor, someone you had known for years, was hiding such a dark secret? As we wrap up this heartbreaking chapter, I want to express my deepest gratitude to all of you who have supported this channel. It's your incredible engagement that allows us to keep uncovering these untold stories, shining a light on the darkest corners of the world. Producing these videos takes hours of research and work, but it's you that makes it all possible. So if this story hit home for you, if it made you rethink who you trust, like this video, subscribe, and join our growing community. Share this story with someone who still believes that good people can't do bad things. Because trust me, this one's going to stick with them. And remember, by hitting that notification bell, you'll be the first to hear when the next shocking true crime story drops. So don't miss out on what's next. Trust me, you'll want to be here for it. In the next few hours, we'll uncover another dark secret buried in a community's past, hidden just beneath the surface of everyday life. This one is just as disturbing, with twists you won't see coming. A new case, a new mystery. One that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end. Stay tuned for more, and remember, the truth is often stranger and more chilling than fiction. We'll be back with another story that proves just how deep darkness can run, even in the most unexpected places.